Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
Today on Spotlight, a 4-foot-tall snow globe assists WashU researchers on the hidden source of snowmelt for climate modeling. Plus, a new exhibit at Soldiers Memorial highlighting military leaders from St. Louis. And then a local man who was a pioneering pilot and Tuskegee Airman. But first, Hawthorne Players bring history to life at Bellefontaine Cemetery. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
Whether it's a simple stone, a haunting statue, or grand mausoleum, every marker in a cemetery is shorthand for a life lived. For the historic Bellefontaine Cemetery, it's of utmost importance that the people resting there and their stories are remembered.
And I urge each of you to remember and cherish your freedoms as well.
Voices at Bellefontaine is a series of live performances by local theater group the Hawthorne Players. Each vignette explores St. Louis and even international history through the experiences of 6 individuals buried there.
I try not to think of this as fiction, but rather to tell the story as accurately as I can. And very often that's as accurately as the newspapers were able to tell it at the time.
These are actual people, and you want to learn as much as you can about them so that you can do justice to their story.
But bringing residents back to life can sometimes be a challenge for writer and director Larry Marsh.
It's harder to find women characters because it's always Mrs. So-and-so. Sometimes it takes a while to find the first name. It's hard to find that with African Americans. Those are greater challenges.
I felt called to find a better place, a safe haven for my people. So I purchased land in the wilderness of St. Clair County, gathered up 11 families and led them across the Mississippi River. Our little settlement grew to be known as Brooklyn, Illinois, which is said to be the oldest incorporated town of colored folks in the country.
Really, part of my attention is to not let things be overlooked. You hate to see people lost. You hate to see ideas lost. One of the things that I try to do, and the people here at Bellefontaine find it as a very important thing to do, is to have diversity. And so looking for men and women, looking for people of color, looking at rich and poor, to try to find a balance.
In my opening address to the convention, I declared, I believe the Constitution of the United States gives me every right and privilege to which every other citizen is entitled. For while the Constitution gives the states the right to regulate voting, it nowhere gives them the power to prevent it.
I'm looking for stories that are entertaining, teach something about St. Louis history at the same time, and perhaps have some modern relevance.
Each generation builds on the work of those who came before. And now, it's your time to affect what will follow.
Exploring connections, whether historical or philosophical, between the stories can create some poignant moments. And working with characters who no longer share the linear timeline of the living enables the actors to engage with the audience and each other in a unique way.
There's an equality, basically, in the afterlife, where those differences are no longer differences, or are differences that make no difference.
I heard a commotion on the corner of 7th and Chestnut. There was a crowd of white folks gathering. Earlier that day, a young mulatto freeman named Francis McIntosh was arrested and taken to jail for stabbing a police officer. An angry mob broke him out of his cell and tied him to a tree. I watched from a distance as they piled wood up to his knees, and then they set it on fire.
The Wainwright Building is an architectural gem and acclaimed by many to be the first modern skyscraper. Thanks to its use of steel instead of wood for its framework, it soars 10 stories high. At the corner of 7th and Chestnut. Yes, Priscilla. It stands at the very location you saw young Francis McIntosh tied to the tree and burned alive all those years ago. I'm so very sorry.
It takes a very special kind of actor to do this because it is physically so demanding, because they do 18 performances in the weekend, and sometimes in bad weather, sometimes in good, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet.
Here in the space, one of the biggest challenges is flying over right now. Here comes another jet that you have to try to talk over.
But sometimes it works out that these interruptions fit right into the story being told.
Now, after a night flight back to Missouri, the spirit of St. Louis swooped low over my house on Portland Place, and Slim waved a greeting. The rest, as they say, is history.
They have so little time to get the attention and to have people care about them.
A trader arrived with a wagon and tore me from my mother's arms. I can still remember my master just standing there in the window, counting his money.
One of the highlights of Voices is the actors' talkback, an audience Q&A which is held after the final performance.
Oftentimes, a lot of people of color stories, especially those who were enslaved, don't get told because they're lost. And so to have someone as monumental as Mother Baltimore, and as I've come to know her over the past 2 days and over the month of rehearsing, her message of freedom and resilience became more real to me.
I am proud to be resting here in the free soil of Bellefontaine Cemetery. And I urge each of you to remember and cherish your freedoms as well.
When you delve down into doing one of these residents' characters, you get even deeper into that feeling, and it just makes it all so special. You just can't help but feel what an incredible place to be. It gives a whole new approach to visiting a cemetery.
We can take solace in knowing that history, even the most disheartening events and attitudes of the past, when known and remembered, can remain an important teacher for us all.
Thank you, Ellis. And thank you all for listening.
And remember,
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
In December, many people dream of a white Christmas. Or they may think, let it snow and all the fun that goes along with it. It's actually kind of like that in this research lab at Washington University in St. Louis.
So you can see it has that soft, powdery texture that you see of freshly fallen snow. This snow is very bright surface. Snow is one of the brightest of all naturally occurring substances. So that's the temperature. We're trying to mimic the environmental conditions in which snow is created.
Ganesh Chilawena, fifth-year PhD candidate, created this 4-foot-tall chamber that's referred to as a snow globe. After all, inside is where the magic happens. Magical, well, maybe not in reality, but scientific, absolutely.
So that's liquid nitrogen coming up, and that's liquid water going down. It's 3 styrofoam boxes stacked on top of each other. We have the liquid nitrogen cylinder, so that's the source of the cold temperature. So we introduce liquid nitrogen through the bottom. We're pushing water at a very high pressure. These water droplets are like less than 100 nanometers, and they'll get flash frozen. Very similar to snow in the real world. Styrofoam boxes, they come in standardized size, so this was closest to what we wanted.
setting the stage for determining what's actually happening after wildfires when dark brown carbon particles deposit on snow.
When wildfires produce huge plumes of smoke, some of this smoke eventually lands on glaciers, darkening their surface and causing them to trap more solar radiation. This can enhance their melting rate and cause glacier recession.
The AIR Lab, which is the Aerosol Interdisciplinary Research Group's lab, first discovered that dark brown carbon has been this hidden source of accelerated snowmelt of mid-latitude glaciers.
This particle was not previously considered to be that important of a light absorber. There were plumes of smoke and sampling the air. This field campaign was the first to identify, characterize, and show that it is at least 4 to 10 times more abundant than the well-understood particle, which is black carbon. Now, the modeling study that I published, when we include both dark brown carbon and black carbon, what we see, this warming enhancement is up to 2 times compared to just black carbon, which was the previously well-understood particle in snow. My research takes it a step further in terms of what happens if this smoke deposits on snow. I'm manufacturing snow. When you darken it because of these wildfire aerosols, they start to trap more heat.
He's trying to validate an agent which gives rise to enhanced snowmelt and see if his model calculations could be observed in a laboratory setting.
Snow aerosol experiments without going to the field. His research could go a long way ensuring accurate climate models and measurements.
Receding glaciers impacts in terms of water availability and water security downstream of major glacier systems. If the snow melts very rapidly, that can lead to flash flooding in downstream areas.
The next step of the experiment is coming soon.
Going to generate dark brown carbon by dry distillation of wood chips, and I will be depositing those particles on the snow. What we're waiting on is some of the equipment that's needed to measure the reflectivity. The reflectivity change is what determines how much heat is going to be trapped due to these particles.
Once the dark brown carbon particles darken the snow, just as it does after a wildfire, the snowflakes would go into a petri dish.
So we will be varying a lot of different conditions related to the snow with the aerosols. We want the snow melt to be predictable.
The snow globe experiments will continue into the new year.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. St. Louis has a rich history of military leaders, highlighted in the St. Louis in Service exhibition at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum, which features larger-than-life images of 20 exceptional individuals. The exhibition honors the service and sacrifices of St. Louis's military personnel, showcasing their significant contributions to the nation's history. Soldiers Memorial Director Mark Sunlove introduces us to 4 of these individuals.
First is Captain Wendell Pruitt, a daring fighter pilot of the 1st African American Flying Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. Raised in St. Louis, Wendell Pruitt flew in Europe with the all-black Tuskegee Airmen as part of the 332nd Fighter Group during World War II. He received his pilot's license while attending Lincoln University in Jefferson City and graduated from the Tuskegee Army Flying School in December 1942. A skilled and daring pilot, Pruitt completed 70 combat missions, shot down 3 enemy planes, and helped sink a German destroyer. Late in 1944, he returned to Tuskegee as a flight instructor, but his career and life were tragically cut short when Pruitt and a cadet died in a training crash. Second is Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare. Butch O'Hare became a fighter pilot after graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy. In February 1942, O'Hare single-handedly shot down 5 Japanese bombers, threatening the aircraft carrier USS Lexington. He received the Medal of Honor for his actions. He then returned home to St. Louis, where he was honored with a parade and went on national tours selling war bonds. Following a brief stint as a pilot instructor in Hawaii, O'Hare returned to active duty in August 1943. On November 26, 1943, O'Hare led the Navy's first nighttime attack from an aircraft carrier. During the action, his plane was shot down and he was never found. 6 years later, Chicago's O'Hare International Airport was named for him, although he never lived in that city. Next is Major General Jeannie Leavitt, the first female fighter pilot of the United States Air Force. General Leavitt grew up in St. Louis, where she attended Bishop DeBerg High School. Leavitt entered the Air Force in 1992 after earning her bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas in Austin, and later earned her master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford University in California. In 1993, she became the first female fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force, and she later became the first woman to command a combat fighter wing. Finally is General Roscoe Robinson Jr., the first African-American four-star general in the U.S. Army. Roscoe Robinson Jr. was born in St. Louis and attended St. Louis University before transferring to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He graduated in 1951 and served 34 years in the U.S. Army. During the Korean War, Robinson was a platoon leader, rifle company commander, and Bronze Star recipient. He then became an instructor in the Airborne Department and went on to graduate from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In 1967, Robinson served as a battalion commander in Vietnam. Following his Vietnam service, Robinson became a four-star general and ultimately retired from the Army in 1985. To learn more about remarkable St. Louis military men and women, visit St. Louis in Service at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum.
Next week on History Spotlight, how Blewett Junior High revolutionized education in St. Louis by engaging students and preventing dropouts.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
Every year, Americans celebrate Veterans Day. But did you know since 1944, St. Louis has set aside one day to honor one soldier in particular? December 12th is Wendell Oliver Pruitt Day. The name may sound familiar, but who was the man behind it, and why was he so celebrated for decades? Pruitt was part of the first black flying unit known as the Tuskegee Airmen. They were a distinguished group who enlisted in the Army Air Corps Cadet Flying Program in 1941 and trained in Tuskegee, Alabama.
Well, he's from St. Louis. He came from the Ville. That's where he was brought up, and he came from a family of 10.
Wendell was the youngest of Elijah and Melanie Pruitt's large brood. Born in 1920, he attended Sumner High School and briefly studied at what is now Harris Stowe State University. He transferred to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, known in the 1940s as the Black Harvard of the Midwest, and where military traditions run deep.
He was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. He was well liked by his peers.
At the time, Lincoln University was one of 3 black colleges that conducted civil pilot training and is the institution that laid the foundation for Pruitt's career.
And he only had like a month and a half to go to finish his degree, but he heeded the call like a lot of other young men did on this campus. And it's just amazing how they sacrificed themselves for their country.
Pruitt was already a licensed pilot when he enlisted. Just 2 years earlier, blacks were not allowed to fly until President Roosevelt relented under pressure and ordered the civilian pilot training program. Pruitt's red-tail plane was christened Alice Joe after his fiancée. This displayed downtown at Soldiers Memorial History Museum pictures Pruitt handing a ring over for safekeeping.
That ring was left with his mechanic, or the young man that took care of his airplane every time he went on a mission.
He was credited with shooting down 3 enemy planes and destroying 8 others on the ground. But it was what happened flying over the Adriatic Sea in the Mediterranean when Pruitt and his wingman, Lieutenant Lee Archer, earned the moniker the Gruesome Twosome.
He'd pull ahead and I'd pull right behind him and try to stay on him. He was a heck of a pilot, and just staying there sometimes was a full-time job.
With no bomber or torpedoes on board, Pruitt had sunk a German destroyer the size of a football field using only machine guns.
One of those bullets hit all that ammunition on deck, and what should have been a small boom became a big boom. That ship was so damaged that it would have to be scuttled. And he is the only one in history, since, before, and after, that has got credit for sinking a German ship with a .50 caliber bullet.
That was in 1944, and in December, St. Louis welcomed home their decorated hero. Posters were put up all over the city.
Some of the people that knew him that said when he visited the schools and everything, he was so kind and quiet, but never into self at all. To me, is to me the most important thing. I liked his humbleness.
Captain Pruitt told his family he was anxious to return to action, flying over Europe, but his transfer was delayed due to the death of President Roosevelt. Instead, he was sent back to Tuskegee to instruct new fighter pilots.
The last time he came back, he told my mother, he said, these airplanes are really bad news, because they gave them the worst airplanes, just kind of junk, but they flew them. And he said when he goes up in the air, it feels like he's flying in a casket.
Those were prophetic words. In April 1945, Captain Pruitt took a student up in a trainer plane. It crashed and both were killed. Pruitt was only 24 years old. But St. Louis would not forget their hero. In the 1950s, his name, along with local Congressman William Igoe, was lent to the ill-fated federal housing project called Pruitt-Igoe. In 1984, the Pruitt Military Academy was established, but is now known as the Pruitt Charter School. And in 2007, President George Bush awarded all Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal, which Judith proudly keeps. And to further her uncle's legacy, Judith and her mother helped raise money for a mural by local artist Solomon Thurman, which celebrates the history of Black Americans in flight. Anyone passing through Terminal 1 at Lambert Airport can spot Captain Pruitt, his wingman, and the Red Tail fighter plane. Captain Wendell Oliver Pruitt is buried at St. Peter's Cemetery in Normandy, Missouri.
You can find the stories featured in today's show along with past episodes and more at hecmedia.org/spotlight.
On the campus of Concordia Seminary in Clayton, in the Christine K. Hasse Memorial Library, back behind the Rare Book Reading Room, which is adjacent to the Rare Book Storage Room, is where you'll find this library's rarest book of all. So valuable, we can't show you exactly where they keep it, but we can show you exactly what it is.
Apparently Bach bought it for his personal use.
Yes, that Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. And this was his family Bible. And not just any Bible, but a 3-volume study Bible, published in German with commentary by Lutheran theologian Abraham Kalov. But it's not Kalov's commentary that makes this Bible priceless.
The really fascinating thing about this Bible is it's not just Bach's signature on the title page. We have his marginal annotations and some fairly lengthy comments throughout. And his comments on passages where he talks about music in the Old Testament celebrations and things like that are really pretty interesting for Bach scholars to look at.
Take, for example, Bach's comments, handwritten in German, scribbled alongside 2 Chronicles 5.
The note that Bach writes in the margin here says, "Note well, where there is devotional music, God with his grace is always present."
The story of how Concordia Seminary came into possession of the Bach Bible is itself a tale of biblical proportions. Beginning with a German immigrant who bought it from a used bookseller in Philadelphia in the early 1800s. They think this marking somehow indicated the price. The buyer was Ludwig Riesle, who eventually passed it on to his son, who lived in Michigan.
In 1934, a pastor from Detroit went to a conference of the Synod in Frankenmuth, Michigan, and stayed with his cousin's family. His cousin's husband wanted to show him an old German Bible that his father had had. And he brought it down, showed it to this pastor, and the pastor noticed right away Bach's signature on the title page.
The pastor, knowing the president of Concordia Seminary was a Bach enthusiast, told him about the Bible. In 1938, Concordia's president acquired it for the library.
It is quite a story. Nobody really knew it was here. Between when the seminary acquired the Bible and 1962, nobody actually paid much attention to it. In fact, they sort of rediscovered it when they moved into this new library from the old one.
Scholars have been studying it ever since. Bach's substantive comments are few and far between, but when he does offer his thoughts, they seem to close the book on long-held notions that Bach was not particularly devout, even though he wrote a lot of church music.
Bach was a very religious person, a very convinced Lutheran. What that side note says is, note well, this chapter is the true foundation of all God-pleasing church music. It seems he's looking for this in the Bible, the connection between music and worship and music and God.
The Bach Bible has undergone years of scrutiny to verify its authenticity.
In 1982, it was sent off to a lab at UC Davis for some very advanced testing of the ink, which they could really do for the first time without destroying a sample. They proved that it is consistent with what Bach would have had at hand for ink, that it matched other samples, and so it was kind of beyond a reasonable doubt actually his writing.
A facsimile of the Bach Bible has been published and is for sale. And on rare occasions, the original is put on public display, like at the seminary's annual Bach birthday celebration.
They're in awe, especially if they're Bach fans. In fact, we just had a group here from Japan that viewed the Bible, and they were kind of stunned silence for a minute.
There are 6,000 books in Concordia Seminary's rare book collection, each with a story to tell. But the real value of the Bach Bible is that it speaks volumes about the person who owned it.
The big thing we learn about Bach from looking at especially his notes in the Bible is the way he thought about music and God, how he combined his faith and his work, and really thought about what it means that music is being performed in a church. He saw a very deep connection there, perhaps a connection that transcends words.
Next week, realistic custom backdrops created by a St. Louis artist. Plus, did you know Santa Claus was first found in St. Louis? We'll explain. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.